Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming to this last TEFAF coffee talk, which I expect is going to be mesmerizing. I'm so delighted to be introducing a program as part of the TEFAF New York Cultural Program on drawing. I myself am, I confess, a latecomer to drawing. But in the last year, I have seen so many impressive exhibitions on drawing, and I have become completely converted and an enthusiast. So I'm so excited that we have the opportunity to do something with this, and with such a prestigious group of people. The housekeeping point that I keep forgetting to do, but I'm now remembering, is to let you know that this program is live streamed. It will be up online immediately and will be archived on our website, so you can return to these discussions anytime you want. And I've done that myself with panels that we've had in the past because they're so good, and it's a good refresher. They're so good and so full of information. I'm going to introduce our moderator, and then he'll take it from there. Brett Littman, formerly, but only by a few days, of the Drawing Center, and now installed as director of the Noguchi Foundation and Garden Museum. Congratulations, and take it away.
Great, thank you, Linda. Very, very happy to be here today. And again, I was going to preface the talk by saying, why would the director of the Noguchi Museum be giving a lecture or moderating a talk about drawings? Well, I did spend the last 11 years up until Tuesday last week being the director of the Drawing Center, and it's a place where I worked for 8 years with Claire Gilman, who is our senior curator, chief curator at the museum. So I've been pretty invested in drawing over the last decade. We've done a lot of projects and really taken an approach to the way that we view drawing that I think is a little different from some of the collecting institutions and other institutions even that are more like a Kunsthalle, like the way the Drawing Center was. We're a museum that does not collect. So I wanted to bring together some different divergent ideas about how drawing operates. I'm going to talk a little bit from my position as the director in terms of my thinking about the institution and about the medium. Then Claire is going to present some current projects that she's working on that I think will explore what I might call the third stage of the Drawing Center, a kind of new sense of programming and ways in which drawing is intersecting with ideas that are outside of purely aesthetics. And then Kim is going to talk a little bit about the Whitney collection and maybe the ways that that collection has been shaped. And then we're going to open it up to a dialogue between the three of us and then invite you all to join us and ask questions as well. I'm going to do a little, if you wouldn't mind, bear with me, actually ask you to participate in this. I'm going to show a couple of slides and ask you whether or not you think these things are drawings. For me at the Drawing Center, I felt that when I arrived at the Drawing Center, we were still, this was in 2007, still in a fairly defensive position about the medium, meaning that we wanted to valorize it, we wanted to make sure that it was important in contemporary art, it was art historically important. There was a moment when, if you remember, the Drawing Center was founded by Martha Beck, who was the curator of drawings at MoMA, and she resigned in protest in 1976 because every time she probably pitched a show to Dick Oldenburg, he said, great, we'll put it in a closet on the second floor. I mean, in some ways, drawing was even lower than prints and photography. And I think she was quite prescient in understanding that drawing was being used by artists as a means, an end in and of itself. And this is quite important to recognize. But I think that there was this period where MoMA had the Judith Rothschild show, there was the Tangled Alphabet show with Leon Ferrari and Mira Schindel, and I had just come from PS1 to the Drawing Center, so I was pretty close with Glenn Lowry. We had lunch one day, and I said, thanks, Glenn, and he said, why? And I said, the whole building is drawing. So Martha would have been actually quite happy about that. I mean, the sixth floor, the second floor. So there was this moment also of a revelation that drawing might now be something that we didn't have to defend anymore. So maybe we had to look at it in a different way. And that was something that I gave some thought to, and I really kind of conceived that maybe the question that our institution would need to ask as opposed to a collecting institution would be something more along the lines of, is this thing a drawing? Because that opens up a dialogue that can also include other disciplines and other ways of thinking. And that, I think, set a tone for at least about a decade of work that I did at the institution. So the first slide is a slide of the work of Sterling Ruby. This is actually a photograph of a paint shield, a paintball shield, like if you're doing those games where you shoot paintballs at each other. Would you consider this a drawing? Anyone in this room? One person? Okay, great. Two? This is a film by Robert Breer. This is a direct film, meaning that it was painted or drawn directly onto celluloid, made in 1956. Would you say that this is a drawing? Anyone? Okay, a couple more hands. That's good. This is the work of Gego, or Gertrude Goldschmidt. This is a work where I think for Gego the idea was not necessarily the metal construction, and she did not call them sculptures. She called them constructions. In many ways, for her, the work really existed in between the spacing of the construction and the wall, and of course the shadow that it cast. So would you consider this a drawing? Okay, more hands, great. This is the work of John Kessler. John is primarily known as a video artist and installation artist. This is a body of work he made at Dieudonné with paper pulp and collage. Would you consider this a type of drawing? Not too many people. This is the work of Yannis Xenakis, the great Greek composer and architect and engineer. These are drawings made with what was called a UPix machine, a piece of hardware that he actually designed, where he could draw on a tablet, which then would create music. So this is actually a music score. Would you consider this as a form of drawing? This is the work of Guillermo Cuitca, part of his Diarios series. These are works in which he takes discarded or old canvases, staples them onto a table that is seated in his studio in Buenos Aires in Argentina. And generally over about a 4 to 8 month period of time, he makes doodles, notes. I actually went to Buenos Aires and sat with him at that table, and I wrote my email and my home phone and my address. And then later, he'll take those and turn them into canvases and then display them. You might have seen some in Rob Storr's Venice Biennale a couple of years ago, maybe a decade ago. Would you consider this kind of doodling or sketching a form of drawing? This is the work of Susan Afuna, an artist who does draw, but also makes sculptures and performance. This is a piece called Notations, where Susan would come to, actually this is at the Drawing Center, and draw with chalk on the floor every morning. And then we did a dance performance with a choreographer named Luca Vighetti, and the dancers would come and erase the drawings in the evening. So this happened over a 3-day period, and there was also a film that we made that was in conjunction with that. So would you consider this performative activity a form of drawing? Okay. This is the work of Bill Anastasi. Bill, you may know, is a kind of conceptual artist, works in many different mediums. This piece is called the 2-second piece, where Bill stands at the top of a ladder with a paint can and smashes it against the wall and then just watches it drip down. So this is a kind of variable installation. Would you consider this a form of drawing? This is the work of Matt Mulliken. Matt does a performance as that guy. This is actually under hypnosis, so he makes many, many drawings and performances under hypnosis, sometimes on chalkboards and sometimes on fabric. So again, would you consider this kind of performative activity where there's a blackboard and someone drawing under hypnosis a form of drawing? And the last piece I want to show is actually a copper matrix. This is Vassi. It's from the Calcografia, an archive in Rome. And this is, again, not a print and not a drawing. It's actually just the matrix itself of the impression, an etched or engraved copper print. Can copper prints be considered drawings? Okay. So the good news is that not many people have actually thought any of these things that I've showed are drawings. And I want to kind of end this game by simply saying that all of those things are things that I showed at the Drawing Center over the last 11 years. So to set the tone for at least a way of understanding how this medium operates, I think for me at the Drawing Center, it was important to keep on pushing the boundaries and to be right at the edge of where we might step off the island of drawing to somewhere else and to look backwards. I was interested in really kind of problematizing and questioning what are the values of drawing? What are the core values? What are the things that really would define drawing? And please do not ask me to define what a drawing is. I won't do that. I have spent a long time trying to avoid that very question, not because I don't want to answer the question, but I don't think that it's actually a useful question at the moment. It's better to kind of think about this in a very global way and to maybe change one's perception of what the medium can and can't do. So I'm going to turn it over to Claire now, who will talk a little bit about the program at the Drawing Center.
Thank you, Brett. And thank you, Linda, for having us today. So thank you for that presentation, because that sort of perfectly leads into my discussion. So indeed, while the Drawing Center is a medium-specific institution, as you can see, it is not so easy to define what the medium of drawing is. And for instance, I think it is important to point out that at the Drawing Center, we definitely do not define drawing as being purely and simply works on paper. As Brett said, we sort of try not to define what drawing is specifically, but I think there are ways in which we can say, ways in which we definitely do not define drawing. So we would not say that a drawing is exclusively a work on paper. Rather, we stage exhibitions that force us to think through what a drawing is and can be, and often that encourages us to consider drawing through the lens of other media. So I think the goal for us is not necessarily, as we said, to define drawing, but to use it as a means for thinking through the role of visual objects in general and what they can and cannot do. So, so the approach that Brett and I have taken over the past 8 years, as Brett said, I've worked with him there for 8 years, is one that reaches across historical and aesthetic boundaries. And to clarify our position, we recently reworked our mission statement, and I think it's actually quite useful to look at the difference between our previous mission statement and our current mission statement. So our old mission statement, the Drawing Center is the only fine arts institution in the US to focus solely on the exhibition of drawings, both historical and contemporary. It was established in 1977 by curator Martha Beck to provide opportunities for emerging and under-recognized artists, to demonstrate the significance and diversity of drawings throughout history, and to stimulate public dialogue on issues of art and culture. And our new mission statement, the Drawing Center, a museum in Manhattan's Soho district, explores the medium of drawing as primary, dynamic, and relevant to contemporary culture and the future of art and creative thought. Its activities, which are both multidisciplinary and broadly historical, include exhibitions, open sessions, a curated artist program encouraging community and collaboration, the Drawing Papers publication series, and education and public programs. So some key differences between the two that I want to highlight are, in the old mission statement, the use of the terms drawings, which I think for me, and probably for most people, implies discrete objects or works on paper. Whereas the new mission statement uses the term drawing, which for me, and suggests not an object, but an action, right, which can occur in multiple media. So if you're saying, this is a drawing, someone might often visualize in their mind a work on paper. But if you say, this artist uses drawing, I think that opens up a range of possibilities to think through what that might mean. So also, I want to draw attention to this phrase, the future of art and creative thought, which connects to our interest in the way in which drawing reaches across disciplines. So everyone draws, architects, filmmakers, even chefs. We did an exhibition, actually Brett did an exhibition with the famous chef of El Bulli, Ferran Adria, and the drawings that he uses in preparing his menus. And we are also interested in the way drawing interacts with other disciplines, even when it remains bound to the paper support. So when asked to define drawing, if I am asked to define drawing, I like to say that I am not interested so much in what drawing is as in how it functions, so that there are multiple ways in which drawing can act or behave. I'm going the right way here, yeah. So some ways drawing functions, drawing is or can be a way of thinking, it can be an intermediary between self and world, it can be a way of mapping space. I do think one fundamental aspect of drawing, when I am really pushed to define it, is that it does have something more to do with the line than with the support, more to do with this idea of passage and the kind of temporality of movement from one place to another place. So that's really what I fall back on, but I think our interest is really just in exploring that question rather than saying giving one answer. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes of my time showing you, walking you through a few exhibitions that I have done at the Drawing Center, actually from the beginning of my time at the Drawing Center to the present. Since we are pressed for time, I may just kind of briefly touch on a few points about each of these exhibitions. I'm not going to describe each slide in detail, but Brett can sort of pick up on some of these things and go back, and we can have further conversation if people have questions. So, sorry, I'm going the wrong. Okay. So the first exhibition is actually from my first show at the Drawing Center, which was called Drawn from Photography from 2010. And it was a group show featuring 13 artists who made labor-intensive renderings after photographs, all of which had a social or political resonance. And it came about really through observation, which is my favorite way to put together an exhibition, which is that I had sort of perceived this trend out there in the world of artists making these very, very detailed, precise renderings after photographs, and I wanted to sort of figure out why that was. Why were artists doing this? Why apply one technique to another in this way, and why engage in this sort of seemingly very rote act of copying, which is kind of antithetical to our understanding of drawing as this sort of inspired, very personal act. I think some of us have that kind of preconception about drawing. So just to show you a few images so you get a sense of what was in the show, the big piece with the multi-panel piece, or the double panel piece with the small drawings on beige and brown paper, was a piece by Emily Prince, which was called All the U.S. Servicemen and Women Who Died in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so that's literally what it was. She documented all of the servicemen and women who died from the beginning to the end of the war. They were color-coded based on race and also arranged based on time of death. And she used photographs of the individuals to essentially make these drawings after them. That's a close-up of one of them. This is a piece by Mary Temple, which was similar in that it was kind of a calendar-type piece, and these were pictures, and here's a detail, daily pictures that she would look at the newspaper every morning and find a news story that interested her for whatever reason and pull the leader, the kind of protagonist from that story, and then she would make a portrait of that figure and place them on the page depending on her sense of hopefulness. So high up on the page, she was feeling a kind of great amount of hope. So this was a few years ago now. And low down on the page, feeling less hopeful. And then she would actually email these to the Drawing Center every day, and we would print them out. So it was really like a running diagram about what was happening in the world. This was a drawing by Andrea Bowers, based on a nonviolent protest training photograph. Frank Selby, a drawing of Paris, 1968. I'm just going to pass over these for time constraints. This is a drawing by Carl Handel of the front page of Pravda newspaper, which was a Soviet newspaper. And I think sort of the most radical thing about this show was that it suggested a kind of new definition of creativity, that creativity does not require invention, but that rather this kind of seemingly rote act can be creative when it involves a sort of deeply felt response to the world. And so, Mary Temple said, well, if I don't know what to do kind of in this chaotic world, the one thing that I know that I can do is pay attention. And she did so sort of through the tools of her trade, which is drawing. And I think that the show sort of struck a chord with the generation at the time who was looking for this kind of sense of paying attention in this sort of rapidly moving, kind of technologically saturated world. And I think it's also, the reason I'm sort of talking about it today is that it shows, I think, how drawing expresses something or sort of reveals its own potentiality in and through its contrast or juxtaposition with another medium. So that's how sort of going outside of drawing specifically, thinking about its relationship to photography, allows us actually to understand better what it is that drawing can uniquely do. Another exhibition that asked us to sort of challenge what we think of as a drawing, maybe even more specifically, was a show that I did called Dickinson Waltzer Pencil Sketches, which was in our drawing room, our smaller gallery. And that was a show that explored two writers whose work assumes visual form. So Robert Waltzer, who's a Swiss writer who developed this highly kind of systematic form of writing called microscript, which was essentially unreadable, so they looked like visual objects. And Emily Dickinson, who unbeknownst to most people until that time, when it was kind of revealed, there was actually a book published shortly after I did this show, that also revealed the fact that she wrote many of her poems on scraps of paper and envelopes. And so actually the content of her poems would often mimic the visual form of the material that she was writing on. So if she would write about birds, she wrote that poem on an envelope that looked like it had wings. I'm sorry, the images are not so clear here, but you can sort of see a little bit what I'm talking about. And so really the point of this show, my intention was not to claim that these works were drawings, but rather it was to encourage people to reconsider the status of these documents by putting them on view in an institution that was specifically dedicated to drawing. And I made this very clear in my wall text, so I'll just read you the wall text. I said, what is the status of these works? Are they texts? Not exclusively. Drawings? Perhaps. Dickinson Waltzer pencil sketches gives viewers the opportunity to decide for themselves. With extreme handwriting carefully adapted to the support at hand, stray marks, and linguistic overlays, these objects are perhaps best described as visual works by two writers with all the uncertainty that such a phrase implies. So this was a very successful show, and I guess I would say a sort of beloved show by a certain audience, and it was very well attended. But we also did receive some criticism for the show on the part of art critics, which was really actually quite baffling to me. I was actually very, very surprised by this, that there were some well-known critics who did not like the fact that we were, or said that we were sort of trying too hard to bend the definition of drawing, which, no, I'm not gonna name names. Which really, I have to say, surprised me, because I thought we were at a moment in time where that kind of conservative outlook, that we had sort of moved beyond that. So I was really intrigued by the fact that audiences were extremely receptive to this show, but critics sort of did not want us to, go to test our mission in that sense. So that's just an example of, a place where we get some pushback because of the fact that we are the drawing center and some certain expectations of what that means that we should show. How am I doing for time? Should I, one more show? Should I do Rashid or I don't know. Maybe Winter Term. Okay. Oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. So I was gonna I'll pass over this show, but if people wanna, you can take it in right now if you have questions about it. Passing over. Okay, so, currently, we started to rethink a couple of years ago about ways that we could expand our reach and in general at the Drawing Center, and kind of better involve diverse groups of people. And related to this, we began thinking about new curatorial models beyond the traditional exhibition model. So I think we're quite lucky in this because drawing is by its nature a universal medium, and people relate to it, and people do it, or most people have at some point done it. And so we started thinking, is there a way that we can activate drawing to reach beyond the museum's walls? Can we sort of exercise some kind of real and practical effect in the lives and minds of our visitors? So to that end, we developed Winter Term, which is a new annual initiative in which we partner with an artist or organization whose mission it is to explore the practical role that drawing plays in the world with an eye to issues of social justice. And it is a 2-week long, well, actually, it was 2 weeks in its iteration this year, but we're thinking that we are going to expand it to be a month-long program that consists of an exhibition and an education component, so including public events, classes, and performances. So it's really a kind of an activated space. And this past February, March, we completed our first iteration with the artist Torkwase Dyson. And Dyson is an artist who makes abstract work that is sort of deeply steeped in political intention, which is not a combination that one often finds, and that I think is a terrain that is difficult to navigate. And it is directly evident in her titles and in her colors. She's using largely tones of black and gray. She's an African-American woman, and she's very concerned with the legacy of her history of the transatlantic slave trade. But it's less evident, just in the forms themselves immediately. I don't think I really have time to sort of talk through her work, but I would be happy to if people have questions later. But I'm just showing you a few examples so you can see. This is called Black Interiority. My Mind is Clear of Fear. These are auction block. She does a series called auction block drawings. Black compositional thought, which is a term that she's come up with. And this is actually an image from the drawing room gallery of our show. But in the forms, I think what's important is that these works do concern kind of articulation and difference within confined or limited space, dialogue and mutual dependency, flexibility and malleability. And these are all terms that she then appropriated in this kind of larger program that she did with us. So she was interested in starting a drawing school, and I had actually done a studio visit with her where she mentioned this, which she was calling the Winter Wells Drawing School for Environmental Justice, which was named after Jamaican cultural theorist Sylvia Wynter and civil rights activist Ida B. Wells. And she was interested in exploring with people, they could be artists or not, issues of kind of thinking through environmental equity and environmental justice through using abstraction and using drawing. And so I thought, okay, this is the perfect project for us to do for our first winter term, and I invited her to come to the Drawing Center. And she had 3 different classes on 3 different days, each on a different topic, basically related to the question of how we occupy space and how we can use drawing to investigate our personal relationship to the natural world and environmental inequity. She also had office hours, she had a closed-door performance that was documented in photographs, and public panels. So winter term was really about giving Dyson a voice and allowing her to be present with her work and to encourage others to think about their relationship to the world. And so this is something that hopefully will become an ongoing program, and we will be working with a new group next year.
Okay, so I will be talking about drawing at the Whitney, which I think should be interesting in relation to a number of these themes that now have come up regarding the Drawing Center and how that medium-specific institution thinks about the medium of drawing. So I will be talking about this in relation to a collecting institution where we think about drawing not just as a verb, but also as a noun, as objects that are collectible and that help to build our collection and that will then be there throughout history. I wanted to start by just talking about the fact that drawing is actually at the very heart of the founding of the Whitney. That in 1918, when Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney had set up her studio in downtown Manhattan, she developed shortly thereafter the Whitney Studio Club, which is sort of a predecessor to the Whitney Museum as we know it today. And that studio club you see here in a photograph by Charles Sheeler on the left became a community space. Her idea was that it was a space for artists in the area to both come together for conversation, but also to work. And one of the main things that they did together was to have sketching sessions. So on the right, we have this wonderful print in the collection called the Whitney Studio Club Frenzied Effort. And if you look closely, you'll see a number of artists crowded around a model having a life drawing session within the Whitney Studio Club. So there are many aspects of that history of the Whitney that we do try to maintain within the building, thinking about how we can bring that kind of activity, the kind of thinking about our visitors as being able to participate in the act of drawing in the same way that Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney herself made the Whitney Studio Club very much open for anyone. It was not, she did not want it to be a kind of a closed-door private club experience. So here is, this is an image of a life drawing class that took place in the theater at the Whitney in the new building. I think especially in the opening of the new building for the Whitney in 2015, there was a concerted effort to look back at the Whitney's history, to try to think about what are the core values of the Whitney as an institution, how do we bring aspects of the building from the old building, but also thinking about the original spaces of the Whitney that were downtown that relate to our current downtown location. I should also say, which I didn't mention at the beginning of this talk, that I actually only started at the Whitney in September. So I cannot say that I took part in any of these particular projects or take claim for how those projects came together. But I'm also kind of using the experience of speaking with Brett and Claire today to think through all of these kind of fascinating aspects of the Whitney's history and as we continue to move forward. In addition to these kind of structured spaces, structured performances, like the last one I just showed, of course, as in many museums throughout the city, drawing is central to our programs, to students coming in to classes, but also to any of our visitors. So especially on Tuesdays when we're closed, you walk through the galleries and pretty much everyone is on the floor, which is kind of amazing, just a few kids sitting everywhere. And it's something that we also continue to promote on any other day that you would come in. So all of the family activity guides and activity guides in general that are created for each exhibition actually keep drawing central. It's really the one type of creating experience that one can do in the drawing. In the museum, we obviously can't have someone coming in wielding paintbrushes with oil paint, but we can have them have pencils. So the way that we have tried to do this through these activity guides, that's actually my son on the right, making a wonderful portrait off of American Gothic. But to use prompts. So in this case, to look at James Castle drawings that are currently on view in the Where We Are collection exhibition as a way to allow everyone, obviously children included, to look at the art around them, to give them a question from which they can kind of take that any way they choose. So sidestepping for a moment from the Whitney, I did want to talk about, this is actually a project that I had worked on in my former life as the curator at the Rose Art Museum, where we put together this exhibition with the artist David Shrigley, which is part of his life model project. And so for this project, it was actually about this idea of, for him, the activity of drawing, of this kind of a life drawing session became the artwork itself. Just to give you a basic sense of that, he made a drawing of what he perceived as a life, like what would be kind of actually kind of comical life model. From that drawing, a life model was produced as a sculpture. And that is our lovely woman who is standing in the middle of the galleries, towering over 10 feet tall, and also holding a pose that would be extraordinarily difficult for a life model to hold for a long period of time. If any of you have ever done it, you would, or ever just tried various athletic experiences, you know that holding your arm like this is actually very tiring. So he was kind of thinking about all these things and then and extending body parts in ways that looked almost right but weren't quite. So if you knew all of your correct proportions as you start to learn in life drawing classes, you would be totally thrown off. But the real kind of twist with the project was that that was his contribution, was his sculpture in the middle. And then the real artwork, the exhibition, was something that unfolded over time and that was made by visitors. So he felt that all of the drawings that were made by visitors who were in the gallery space and then hung on the walls, that they were actually really interpretations of his work. So it was his show, but it was actually, you can see in this, by the end of the exhibition, the walls were completely filled with visitors' drawings that then become part of the artwork and travel with it to the next venues that the project might be shown in. One thing I would mention about this in relation to kind of smaller institutions or medium-specific exhibitions versus larger institutions, or medium-specific institutions versus larger institutions, was that as I was there, and I had previously been at MoMA, so I had a sense of the larger institution, I recognized that what a wonderful thing to be able to do a project like this, because in a larger institution, this kind of project is nearly impossible. And I regret saying that, but I mean, we had pastels, we had charcoal, we had all of these types of materials that become very difficult to have within a large institution, and also just the visitorship. to be able, if you think about, I'm sure that all of you saw, the Marina Abramovich show at the Whitney with lines outside the door and everybody trying to, the idea of the participatory project is very complicated in these large institutions. So I love the idea of it, and then it can be a little tricky. So now I want to just talk very briefly about a couple of things that we think about in relation to drawing at the Whitney. The first of which relates to how drawing functioned in exhibitions and programs in the old building, in the Breyer building uptown, versus how we're thinking about it now in the new building. So I'm kind of setting this up as kind of isolation versus integration. Previously, drawings were very often shown in the old Whitney building in dedicated galleries, and that's really true of a lot of institutions. MoMA has drawing galleries, the Met has drawing galleries, print galleries, and that there's something kind of great about that, because you're able to kind of enter this space, usually more dimly lit, no windows, often a more intimate space, and really be in the be kind of in the thick of the question of drawing. In the new building, those types of spaces do not exist. So we do not have drawing-specific galleries. We do not have any works on paper-specific galleries, which means that drawings, prints, photographs all appear within collection installations. So we're in a full integration mode. What is exciting about this is that the Whitney collection in total is approximately 24,000 works of art, which is actually not that large for an institution with, at this point, we have 63,000 square feet of gallery space. And a lot of that is dedicated to permanent collection. Within that 24,000 objects in the collection, we have about 19,000 works on paper. So what you find is that often when we're doing these collection exhibitions, the only way that we can really, or maybe a richer way for us to tell narratives about specific moments or specific themes, is by drawing very heavily, in fact, on the drawings, the prints, the photographs in the collection. So drawings have been featured in a very central way. I'm just showing you a couple slides from America's Hard to See, which was the Whitney's opening show in the new building, where you see our famous Sacco and Vanzetti Ben Shahn painting surrounded by drawings that help to further illustrate that particular moment. Same here with, this is just other works on paper, Ansel Adams and prints by Obata, and same thing with Via Selmans, and then a number of other photographs around that. Continuing today into the current collection exhibitions where we are, where would have been, I think, strange, in fact, in the old building, and in fact in many institutions, to see a Clifford Still painting, a Barnett Newman painting next to a J. DeFeo drawing. But that is kind of how we are really operating in the installations in the new building. Within that, we do try to sometimes have these kind of breakout spaces. So if so this is actually in the same exhibition, a small gallery that is separated only by a half wall from the main part of the gallery, but is dedicated to these James Castle drawings that are extremely light sensitive. There are a lot of practical concerns with not having a works on paper dedicated gallery. So we're able to do some things like that. And then the other question is in the exhibition program. So within the exhibition program, the Whitney has in the past, especially I would say in the 90s and in the early 2000s, done a number of monographic exhibitions with medium-specific themes. So to look at, most recently, Hopper drawing, but we have really not done that many shows like that most recently. I feel like we're in this interesting moment of it's almost like a pushback against medium specificity, where it's very much about integration, and yet at the same time now we're thinking maybe we should just, we did these great Bryce Martin drawing shows in the 90s and Klaus Odenberg drawings, and so it's always kind of this push and pull, as I think you have also been talking about, in terms of do you separate it and really highlight it, or how do you define it? And then I think what has been interesting in two examples here, these monographic shows for which drawing happens to be central. So although it's not a drawing show, in this case, our former curator of drawings, Carter Foster, had done an exhibition on the artist June Leaf, which was essentially a retrospective of her work, but it was almost all drawing. And it was very much, the idea was to kind of draw from the setup of her studio. So on the right, you see a photograph of her work in her studio, and on the left, kind of how that was displayed in the gallery to try to foreground that idea of the activity of the making. Most recently, the exhibition that we held of Toyin Oji Odutola, which was an exhibition purely of pastels on paper. Will be, I think, in an upcoming show of yours in the fall. And what was so when we acquired 3 of her works through the drawing committee, what was fascinating was that when the New York Times reviewed the show, throughout the review, they called these paintings. So, because it's not something we didn't highlight it as a drawing show, but, and collecting drawings is, I think, maybe the one area we're really thinking about how we define it. That said, it just has to do with kind of what committee these works might be acquired through. So in some cases, like Michelle Stewart, we're looking at a work that she does consider a drawing, but paper that's really made by a rubbing from the earth, but it has quite an expansive presence on the wall. It was a work that was acquired jointly between the drawing committee and the painting and sculpture committee. Sometimes these are simply financial decisions, sometimes they're more conceptual. Or on the right, Yuji Agamatsu, whose work is quite sculptural on the one hand, but that he considers it a drawing. He sees these kind of scraps, detritus throughout the city on the ground that he becomes fascinated by the line that they might make. And so he basically collects it as a ready-made and hangs it on the wall. And so this was one of the more recent acquisitions from the committee.
Thank you, Kim. Appreciate that. I want to just do a couple of, if you don't mind, rapid-fire questions to both of you, and then we'll open it up to the audience. I surely was not trained as a curator of drawings, and I don't think either of you necessarily specialized in that. What's the difference for you in terms of working in a medium-specific institution, in your case, and now running a department, in terms of your approach to curating, using drawing as the core for your activities? Yeah, either of you, yeah.
Well, I love working in a medium-specific institution. I don't know that I would necessarily want to work in any medium-specific institution other than one
You're not going to the
dedicated
Sculpture
to drawing.
Center tomorrow, no.
Probably not. So there's 2 aspects to this. I mean, one is just working in a medium-specific institution I like because I think it is often a great fueler of creativity to have a limitation that you are working with or against. I've always found that if you have that sort of parameter, okay, you're working with drawing. Well, that's already something right there to kind of think about. That's already that already has your mind sort of it already fuels your mind to start thinking, well, what can you do with that, and how can you work with and against that, as opposed to just being somewhere where you can sort of do anything. I mean, I think at the Whitney has its mandate of kind of American art, and that is also a fuel for them. Well, what is American? What does American mean? They've done a lot with that. I think the reason why I like working with drawing specifically is because drawing opens up into so many media. So that for me, I feel limited only in a positive way. I really have not I never feel like, oh, this is something I really want to do, but I can't do it. I feel like everything, there are just so many media that drawing opens up into that I can work with painting, I can work with sculpture, as long I can work with film, as long as those media are kind of investigating drawing in some way. So I really enjoy working in a medium-specific institution.
I couldn't agree more with pretty much every single thing you said. And the distinction, I think, for me, being in a sort of medium-specific department within a larger institution is just that that I actually I've never worked in a fully medium-specific institution, but I find that the conversations that I have with my colleagues who are looking at other mediums. I mean, I would say also the Whitney is less medium-specific in terms of our own bounds as curators than many other institutions. but I love the richness and the conversation with our colleagues. And also, in some cases, it's really exciting to strategize in relation to how a work might come to the collection, that we can really think about how does this artist think about his or her practice. Many artists, they're not saying like, I'm a printmaker, I'm a photographer, but I'm an artist. So with a given project, how can we best kind of hold true to the core of that artwork by, in the case of someone like Michelle Stewart, who's thinking about her work sculptural and also as a drawing, by just that very act of bringing a work in through two committees. So we think about it in different ways along with, but I agree with you very much that parameters can be, in fact, extremely kind of inspirational.
Can I drill down a little further? I mean, and maybe just give a personal anecdote. I mean, I feel like by working at the Drawing Center, I became a kind of spelunker, a person who had to go under people's couches to pull things out of, and go into closets. When I saw a drawing at an art fair or at a museum or at a studio, that often meant then a 4-year investigation, which then opened up into 4,000 drawings, which then I had to deal with this whole body of work to create a show maybe with 60 drawings. So different than my friends who worked with painters who were like, well, they made 6 paintings that year, and I'm gonna do a big retrospective, and I'm only gonna look at 40 or 50 things. I mean, in some ways, it had to change the way that I approach things from a curatorial standpoint, from an intellectual standpoint, also from the sense of curiosity, because I think what drove me was that sometimes these things just were endless. I mean, artists often are hoarding drawings, they're not selling them, so you end up in a situation where you're going into a studio and you really are looking at 4,000 or 5,000 things. So has that have you had that experience also, and has that changed you a little bit in terms of the way that you think about your curatorial work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about 4,000 or 5,000 things that I've encountered on one studio visit, but certainly a number of things. I mean, an example of that would be the Cecily Brown show that I did. And I guess what was exciting about that was that Cecily really had not shown her drawings, but she did approach me to do a studio visit. So I guess that was exciting in the sense that she felt a certain trust in me, I guess, to reveal this material that kind of had not been seen. And we actually went to that studio visit together, so you remember. And we went in, and the floor was covered with drawings. I mean, there were hundreds of drawings. But I think for me that was just I don't know. It's never been something that has been like a scary prospect, I guess, being faced with so much work. It's really only been a quite positive and sort of fluid process of just kind of seeing this material and then just working one's way down to kind of what are the core examples. So it's really a matter of just kind of, I think, figuring out, how, kind of coming up with some categories for yourself and figuring out, how are you going to approach this material, kind of dividing it into categories, working through it, and then it's just that process of like honing down to what you want to show. But that's the exciting part too, because that's where it becomes about you, as a curator. Because I think as Cecily and I used to say when we did this show, or Cecily would say, there were 1 million drawing shows that could have come out of that material. But that was the exciting thing. So I think that sort of speaks to what you're saying.
Yeah, but I think also, in some cases, you and I have also gone off the cliff in the sense of when we're working with material, there's nothing ever been written about it. There's no precedent. There's nothing, no one's ever seen it, really. I mean, it's a kind of interesting and I would say a little bit scary of a position to be in as someone who is an art historian, someone who's, looking at it from the sense of how are we going to place this in a context. I mean, I'm not saying that no other medium has that, but it does seem with drawing that oftentimes you are right at the edge of the cliff with an artist because these works just have not been documented. I mean, unless you're doing a Jasper Johns drawing show or a Twombly drawing show, and you've seen these works before. So I don't know, Kim, if you've had a similar kind of experience that Claire and or maybe I've had and Claire has had as well to a degree.
Well, and I think one thing that you're kind of getting at in thinking about this, like the fact that you go to these visits and there's thousands of drawings, there's something that is often deeply personal for artists about their drawings. And so it's also a question of kind of gauging the sensitivities around them. So I find that it's often that, I'm always kind of sniffing around for where the drawings are, whether I'm at a painter studio or sculptors or whatever. Like, do you do drawings? And I find that I've had situations where I'll, meet with someone a couple of times where they basically tell me, no, I don't do drawings. No, I don't do drawings. And on the third or fourth visit, suddenly the creaky old drawers, start opening, and there's piles of drawings in there. And they say, but you don't really care about these. And I'm like, yes, I do. That's my job. So I find that is a really interesting negotiation. And what you talked about, building trust. And I think that is really, because there are a number of artists for whom, especially if they're maybe primarily known for their work in other mediums, just never thought that their drawings necessarily have that value, or who would want to see this. So I think that has been, I think I'm someone who kind of loves the archival process, that process of discovery and kind of digging through folders, and that for me is a direct translation to that same kind of work as a curator in drawings.
Well, I think it's funny. I would say that one thing that I probably have become is much more persistent, because I have to bug artists much more, than if I was doing a painting show. For instance, I'm working on a show with Neo Rauch. It literally took 2 years for him to even consider to invite me to Leipzig to come and visit him. And of course, when I got there to the studio, his first comment was, I don't have any drawings here. And I said, really? I've come all the way here and there are no drawings? And what he meant was there were no finished drawings. But then he said, just go over there. And there was a kind of flat file, and I opened up the drawer and out popped, 800 drawings. And then I opened up another one, and then I had to photograph 600 drawings myself, which no one had ever photographed. He hadn't photographed, and I started making piles. So in some ways, it's kind of funny, that's a different way of working. I have to definitely kind of keep on people and say, I know you have drawings. I've seen them in a book. Are you interested in showing them to me? And push my way into the door eventually if I can.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying about this stuff not having been documented, it is very important, the relationship that you have with the artist in that sense, because I think they do really become your partner in this. They haven't been documented. It is you, but it's also you rely on the artist to sort of be able to discuss their work, I think, and kind of work with you in coming to an understanding of what these are. So that relationship, I don't know, maybe this is the case for any sort of show, but I think when you're working with material that has never been seen before, that relationship becomes all the more important. And the artist, like you said, they have to be willing. If you have an artist that isn't really ever going to become willing, then I probably don't. At some point I stop pushing there, because what's the point? Like, it's like you want to be working with someone who also sees their work as having value and also wants their work to be seen,
Okay, I think I'm going to ask if we can open it up to some questions. Yes?
So what I have actually is not a question, but just what you said. I want to share something. It made me think about the Michelangelo drawing show. We all know that he burned a lot of his drawing in his lifetime. He never wanted to show anybody because, in drawings, there are a lot of drawings not so good or secret he doesn't want to show. I always say, I had Gary before, I always say I don't trust artists whose drawing is not appealing to me, because I think drawing is something so immediate, intimate, sincere, honest. You can't cheat with drawings. And a lot of times it's also drawings made me understand the artist better, like the painter Gabriele Oracle. I always felt his painting is a little bit flat to me until I saw a book of drawing of circles, and then it convinced me. It's like Lawrence Wiener. I look at his words, but I see poetry, I feel poetry music. Then I saw a show in a gallery from his 80s drawing, real drawing. Then I see what's behind. So with that, actually, it comes to, first of all, thank you for opening my mind about drawing, the definition about drawing. And I can understand with Drawing Center, you try to push the boundary. But maybe I'm too conservative. I come from a background, I feel like I relate so much to Paul Klee when he say a drawing is taking a line for a walk. So with all these projects you do, in one way it's fascinating. It's very natural because our time is so different. In the past was paper, now all kind of high-tech computer, whatever. So we must push that boundary. But also maybe the society is organized differently. So you have project like David Sugar or the other one you mentioned earlier, or the painting by the Argentina artist invite everybody to. Yep. That's more collective rather than personal. But then it comes to my question. So I know you don't want to define it. I know I go to Drawing Center quite a bit, but I think
it's on.
Some way unconsciously, there must be something that make you decide to do certain project. You outlined three, earlier you had slides about, about self and the world and all that. I somehow want to get a hold of that invisible thread.
Okay, there's a lot of parts to your question. So I guess first I would say, this presentation should not make you think that we don't do sort of more traditional drawing shows with drawings on paper, because since you come, that we do. And we currently have a show of Terry Winter's drawings up, which is a very traditional drawing show in any sense of the word, in terms of the medium. I think, as I said, if I am pushed to define what drawing is, I actually agree with you with that quote, the Clay quote, taking a line for a walk, or the quote that you gave. I do, if pushed to define drawing, I would define drawing as having more to do with the line than with the support. So for me, I do have my kind of personal definition of drawing, I guess. I do think that drawing has to do with this idea of movement from one place to another place through a kind of linear movement. I think it has to do with the idea of temporality and lack of finish. Painting, I think traditionally, and obviously artists are always testing these definitions, but traditionally, painting is much more about the kind of tautological completed object, the idea that it is sort of contained within this whole, and drawing by its very nature, because of the fact that traditionally there is space that is left untouched, that then becomes activated through the line, is more about this sense of something that is traveling kind of from one place to another place that has that sense of unfinished built into it. It is more about process. It is more about kind of questioning rather than answering. Yeah, I wouldn't say that every example of drawing is about this kind of intimacy or this, but that doesn't mean that we don't do shows that kind of are about that. So I think for me, it's like I have my own personal understanding of what drawing is. I'm obviously motivated to do shows that are exploring that, but I think that the fundamental thing is thinking through how is this show kind of pushing our understanding of drawing, or how is this show, or how are the drawings in this show expanding our understanding of art more generally. I think what you said before also about this idea that often an insight into an artist's drawings can give you a greater insight to their work as a whole, that is often a motivator for me, for why I do a show. I would refer again to the Cecily Brown show, as well as the Terry Winter show that I'm doing right now, that I feel that there's something in their drawing practice that, and I think this was definitely the case with Cecily's show, that enabled people to understand their paintings better, because the drawings were kind of prior. You're sort of seeing, even though they weren't studies for the paintings, you're seeing her think through. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my
I think we're going to have to
cut off. Okay. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Claire. Thank you for coming this morning on a Tuesday at 11. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Linda, for having us.
Sure. Thank you so much for this wonderful mind-expanding re-examining of the concept of drawing in theory and practice. So grateful to this wonderful panel. So grateful for you for showing up. As a moderator said at the beginning on Friday morning, you are obviously not only art lovers, but you get up early. So thank you so much for our wonderful panel.